Space Marine 2 is incredible, and if you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. But because of how addicted I've been to the game, I kind of wanted to come back to this lore behind how the Space Marines are created and recruited. I don't think this has ever been anything that I've actually done a deep dive into, surprisingly. It was more of just a lot of overviews and some of the Xenos factions here and there. But I'm going to be checking out this video by Luton09. This video is about 6 years old, so I'm not really sure if any of the information is outdated, any of the lore has been retconned or whatever. But Luton makes fantastic videos, which I highly recommend you go and support by clicking on the link at the very top of the description. So I'm sure that if there are any inconsistencies here, you guys will let me know down in the comments. Based off the chapters in the video, I don't think we're going to be getting into how each single chapter does their recruitment, which I think is usually going to be different. Like, I know the Salamanders have some sort of initiation by fire or whatever, but I guess we'll see.
They shall be my finest warriors, these men who give themselves to me. Like clay I shall mould them, and in the furnace of war I shall forge them. They shall be of iron will and steely sinew. In great armour I shall clad them, and with the mightiest weapons they shall be armed. They will be untouched by plague or disease, no sickness shall blight them. They shall have such tactics, strategies and machines that no foe will best them in battle. They are my bulwark against the terror. They are the defenders of humanity. They are my Space Marines. And they shall know no fear.
I've said this time and time again ever since we got into Warhammer 40k, that I feel like the writing fits it perfectly. Like, just the way that everything is described is so intense, and it really sets the tone of the series quite well. It's always surprising to me, though, whenever anybody talks about Space Marines, and they're like, yeah, they're very dumb when it comes to strategy. They always do their one thing that they're really good at, which I don't know if that's just how it's written, or that's just how Space Marines are usually portrayed for whatever reason. But whenever you actually, like, do a deep dive into the lore behind them, and then, like, the way that they train their soldiers and whatnot, I think a lot of them are quite adaptable when it comes to strategy, and they're basically the super soldiers. They're a military force. Why wouldn't they be adaptive in the middle of combat, especially considering how everything in 40k is happening at a different time because of how fucky-wucky the warp gets with real space. So of course you gotta be adaptable. I don't know. It's just strange to me.
Space Marines are humanity's most elite fighting force. They're the defenders of civilization, but their immense power is forged through a harsh selection process, extreme genetic and body modifications. This grueling transformation kills many recruits, and those who do survive it are left arguably barely human. The conversion from weak mortal to demi-godlike superhuman is one gifted to only a tiny amount of humans in the 41st millennium. And Astartes, when his transformation is complete, will be stronger, tougher, mentally more powerful by factors than an ordinary human. And while a Space Marine's prime mission is to protect humanity, their physical disparity from ordinary common humans can actually leave many Astartes to look down on these lesser common humans.
Yeah, I suppose that really depends on the chapter, though. Like, some care more than others, and I feel like there are those that are just kind of indifferent to it. Ultimately, deep down, they're still human, and they still fight for the Imperium of Man, but I can understand their viewpoint being quite removed, and I mean, when you're like twice as big as everybody else, it's kind of hard to feel like you fit in, you know? And I wonder if it's simply due to the training, or is it actually like literal body modification that their willpower is just stronger than everybody else? Because in Space Marine 2, we had seen corruption start to take hold of like some of the Astra Militarum, and there were some that were able to fend it off, but for the most part, the regular humans couldn't really withstand it, while the Space Marines kind of just shrugged it off. So I'm really interested to learn what exactly is going on there. Is it simply that the Emperor protects his Marines? Much more than the Astra Militarum?
While others will feel a renewed sense of dedication to protect those who can barely protect themselves. It's important to remember that Space Marines are the defenders of humanity and not the rulers of it. Humans, for better or worse, have been the leaders of the Imperium of Man until recently with the return of Primarch Roboute Guilliman. While the transformation of a human to Space Marine is complex, you'll often hear the terminology of a gene seed be used.
What is a gene seed?
A gene seed is not literally a seed, but it is a specific organ that each Astartes carries with seed-like qualities. It's a term used to describe generally the genetic material of an Astartes. It's more accurately the cells and DNA required to engineer a human into an Astartes.
Alright.
The gene seed, more specifically though, refers to the Space Marines' progenoid glands, and the clue is in the name there when you think of progeny. These organs in a Space Marine respond to the other genetic implants they have and replicate DNA. Essentially, they are, in a manner of speaking, an asexual form of reproduction, which is why when a Space Marine is fatally wounded on a battlefield, an apothecary will fight to recover his gene seed. It's also why, yes, Space Marines do not require heterosexual reproduction. 5 years from implantation, a Space Marine's neck progeny glands can be harvested, but the chest glands won't be harvested up until 10 years. Space Marines essentially depend on themselves to produce new Marines for the chapter. Lastly, in this general sphere of discussion to answer...
That is that's an interesting thought to have. I guess Space Marines don't have the time to get it done dirty like everybody else. But considering that they're genetically modified superhumans, that's probably for the best.
It's a very commonly discussed topic. Are Space Marines actually castrated? And then, how do they excrete waste? Well, I can't actually recall anywhere in written law this being noted, so if anybody has a specific point of reference, please do link it. But my speculation, based on a few things that I've kind of looked at, is that pretty much the canon opinion is that Space Marines have no sexual drive. However, when it comes to excretion, it's true that their armour is also an environment suit that would cycle and process their own waste, much like a still suit in the Dune universe. Also,
Really?
Space Marines do not live in their armour, although they may wear it for extended periods of time. It can be removed. It's entirely possible that their external genitals are removed and they have implants to take care of waste, but I've got nothing to see that it points towards this. So it's an unknown, but it's not something that's critically really important in the scheme of things.
I mean, like, it's cool, it's badass armor, we're fighting aliens, and chaos too, occasionally. We don't really have to think about the actual specifics of that. I don't know if they'll ever make, like, a book focusing specifically on that aspect either. But maybe Space Marines are just like Japanese idols, and they never actually have to go to the bathroom. It is kind of funny, though, to imagine the Space Marines as the idols of the 40k universe, and they kind of are.
Equally possible that it's just seen as an organ as with everything else, and they just leave it all be. Now, before we look further into how a Space Marine is forged in the 41st millennium, let's remind ourselves how they were created over history. Now, the first form of Space Marine was originally created by the Emperor during the unification wars of the late 30th millennium. Earth at this time was a barren wasteland of scavengers and barbaric warring tribes after civilization had imploded as a result of the Age of Strife. Earth, being cut off from its supply routes in the warp, cannibalized itself and fell into total anarchy. After the Emperor originally created techno-barbarians, a crude adapted form of super soldier, he would form...
Wait, techno-barbarians? Didn't he make the Thunder Warriors? That doesn't sound right. Ah, yeah, right here. The Emperor did not create the techno-barbarians, he created the Thunder Warriors from them, and another one misworded later on in the video. Gotcha. Thought I had to brush up on my lore there again. Granted, though, I still haven't done Lieutenant's series on the Emperor of Mankind. That seems like a massive time investment, which I'll have to get around to.
Into the Thunder Warriors. These warriors were brutal, powerful, and most importantly, highly unstable. The Emperor knew that he wouldn't be able to work with these soldiers forged in the fires of anarchy beyond the unification of Earth's warring tribes.
I think
and
they
so
go
he
crazy
secretly constructed
after a while.
his genetic facilities in a fortress deep below vast mountain ranges on Earth. Here, he would, with some few remaining gene rights, create his Primarchs using his own genetic material as a template. Then subsequently, the very first of the new breed of warriors, the Space Marines, or Astartes. But what are the Thunder Warriors? Imperial records state that the Thunder Warriors were nearly all wiped out during a particularly bloody battle at the end of the Unification Wars on Mount Ararat. Conveniently, the new Legiones Astartes were created readily to replace them.
Conveniently.
Now, records from this time are understandably fragmented, but described eyewitness accounts from the few Thunder Warriors to survive this battle, like Arcturus, stated that it was in fact the Emperor himself who massacred the Thunder Warriors. Others have stated that it was also in collaboration with his custodian guard. In several instances that occurred since this time where Thunder Warriors have appeared and faced their Astartes brothers, the Thunder Warriors have nearly always managed to inflict casualties beyond expectation before they are finally felled. This gives some indication of how powerful they were as warriors, and why the Emperor felt they were perhaps too dangerous given their power and psychological instability to function as a disciplined fighting and defensive force for the new Imperium.
Yeah, there's always that possibility that they're going to go mad or potentially even rebel. And obviously none of the Primarchs would ever do anything like that, you know? Right? So once their task was finished, I can understand why wiping them out was kind of the option there, or the solution to everything. And, you know, put in the new models. But I do feel bad for the Thunder Warriors. Like, they didn't really ask for any of this, and they were trying to do their best in order to aid the Emperor in his conquest of, well, reuniting Earth. Or Terra, my bad. And then they get the short end of the stick.
Regardless, this whole situation is a dark and little spoken of episode for the Emperor of Man. Vocalizing these events would no doubt have some Inquisition or Ecclesiarchy on their way to you very promptly. With the Thunder Warriors killed in the Battle of Mount Ararat, the new Space Marines, the Legiones Astartes, would come to the fore. Unlike their Thunder Warrior forebears, they would undergo rigorous mental training as well as physical and genetic modifications. This would give them immense physical traits as well as being near unbreakable with their mental conditioning. The new Marines were initially segregated into 20 legions. This separation was not for simple organizational purposes. Each legion was imbued with genetic traits from their Primarch, and as such this impacted their character and behavior. To ensure unity, the Emperor designated them to stay together in their legions to reduce friction and ensure cohesion of the Astartes brothers. Through recruiting and conquest of human colonies as the Imperium expanded, so did the Astartes legions. What had begun as a handful of Marines swelled to tens of thousands during the Crusades. This would lead later to heavy damage caused during the heresy after the Primarchs holding such immense power, being the sole commanders of each Space Marine legion. After that period of chaotic incursion, Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, would draft the Codex Astartes.
The Codex Astartes does not support this action.
After much consideration, agree at best that the Space Marine legions be split into chapters. This was to ensure no Space Marine legion could wield the sheer weight of power they had during the Crusades and subsequent heresy. This was known as the Second Founding. Each of these chapters would take a permanent homeworld or fortress monastery in the Imperium. The Codex Astartes states that each chapter would be 1,000 battle brothers in number and manage its own recruitment. A specific development in the creation of a Space Marine was discovered after the Horus Heresy: weaknesses in the gene seed. Now, as I previously explained, the gene seed is the core biological component in the creation of a Space Marine. During the Heresy, Space Marines were created on a massive scale, and as with any biological replication process, if you do this on a large scale, then mutations and errors can occur in this DNA replication.
Yeah, I think there's something with the Space Wolves gene seed where sometimes they go mad and they become werewolves, and I think they kind of had to hunt them down afterwards. And was it the Blood Angels, right, that Sanguinius led? I think they end up seeing everybody as Horus, and so they kind of go mad with anger, fight both friend and foe sometimes.
So another result of the implementation of the Codex Astartes by Guilliman was to slow the process of creating a Space Marine, to more closely monitor their genetic material and the material implanted within new recruits to ensure purity and expunge defects. Guilliman would also establish core genetic banks on Terra to ensure a stock of genetics existed. These pure sources would provide new material for the foundings of Astartes chapters and also prevent any further contamination.
Okay.
As previously described, each chapter is responsible for its own replenishment. It chooses where and how to locate potential Space Marine candidates. Many will recruit solely from their own homeworld, but others will reach out to hive worlds of the Imperium to locate powerful and resilient fighters who have shown promise and an unnatural ability in combat, even potentially recruiting from gang fighters in hive cities. Feral planets can also be good for selection, as the humans here are physically tough and have to deal with daily hardships more frequently than some other Imperial planets. Surprisingly,
I mean, what are they called again? Pleasure worlds? I don't really think those are a hub spot for recruiting a Space Marine. It just makes sense. I think, wait, was it the Raven Guard? I'm pretty sure that there's like an entire legion of Space Marines that only recruits the criminals. Well, from the criminal underbelly of the cities. I mean, as a Space Marine, you've got one job. Gotta kill the enemy, so as long as you're effective at doing that and protecting the brother by your side, then you're good.
Less recruits actually appear from the militaristic worlds like fortress planets, maybe because although knowing lives of military discipline, they haven't endured the true horror and hardships that come from the rougher ends of Imperial life.
Interesting.
Any candidate for a Space Marine will be usually young, between the ages of 10 and 15 years old. Obviously they need to be strong, healthy, and fiercely loyal to the Imperium. Often on worlds where recruitment occurs, young male humans who show exceptional skill or strength are pushed hard to give them the best chance of potential recruitment. Candidates can occasionally be as old as 20, but the full effect of their biological conversions may not be as effective or complete. Standard trials for Space Marine recruitment often involve combat, endurance, perhaps hunting of some extremely dangerous indigenous animal, and for the few who survive the tasks set by the Astartes who are there to supervise, the rewards are beyond estimation. It's difficult to describe just how revered Space Marines are to ordinary citizens of the Imperium.
Well, it certainly depends on the kind of person that you are, but we've always seen the Astra Militarum, and really any citizen of the Imperium, think of Space Marines as angels. Angels standing upon a battlefield, becoming emboldened and more willing to fight against insurmountable odds as long as they know that there's a Space Marine standing by them. Whereas the Adeptus Mechanicus don't really give a fuck. They're just like, another Space Marine. He's probably gonna chew me out for messing with my cool technology. But you know, you can't really get mad at them. They make our weapons.
While they wouldn't be directly worshipped, they are certainly individuals with godlike reverence and awe. Many humans in the Imperium will go their entire lives without ever even seeing an Astartes, and they may only arrive on an Imperial planet once in a generation. On some worlds, they are even somewhat mythical. So for a family on an Imperial world to have their son chosen for Space Marine recruitment and candidacy would be an honour beyond imagination.
Yeah.
But from some perspectives, bittersweet, in as all likelihood they may never see them again once they have been accepted, and in very high possibility will probably die in later processes. But it's nonetheless the highest honour to serve the Emperor and the Imperium in this way, and would no doubt lead to adulation, even possible special treatment for families after the fact. Ordinary citizens understand that to be accepted for the conversion to the Astartes, the Emperor's chosen warriors, is nothing short of becoming a demigod. Then again, you could just as easily have been recruited from a hive world full of daily extreme violence, and your gang was just forcibly made to participate in the trials, and you were simply the only one left alive at the end. So that's your flip side of the coin. Pray you never seek acceptance to the Grey Knights. I'll cover that later.
Oh man, I love the Grey Knights. But I can only imagine the selection process for the Grey Knights. That would probably not go very well for you. Like the odds are stacked against you, and some of the Grey Knights are constantly fighting against whispers from the warp and all that. Because I think they're all psychers too.
Despite all the physical and mental requirements for candidacy, another element is spiritual purity. In the 41st millennium, Imperial society is heavily religious, worshipping the God Emperor, and most importantly, decrying the ruinous powers of chaos. Chaplains and the ecclesiarchy will continually monitor society around Astartes' recruitment sources to ensure that there are no signs of taint by the dark forces of chaos.
Aspirants.
With the easy part over, the selected candidates, now known as aspirants, will begin the ritual process of becoming a Space Marine. This may be a formal process of reciting scripture, or it could involve further trials. These could take place on the homeworld or result in immediate departure for the aspirant. Each chapter has their own private and guarded initiations. Some of these can be heavily traumatic and are usually significantly harder tests designed to break those who show even the smallest cracks of weakness. These trials for the young aspirants may even include ritual slaughter, scarification, even amputation and bloodletting.
Jesus.
It's all designed to prove their commitment, loyalty and unwavering faith in the Astartes chapter.
I mean, you gotta be careful when it comes to the 40k universe. You have no idea whether somebody could end up becoming a traitor or be a traitor unknowingly. Chaos does work in mysterious ways.
Unsurprisingly, some aspirants do not pass this phase of testing physically or mentally. Aspirants will continue periods of testing and examination as well as actual live combat during their period as a recruit for the Space Marine chapter. And some of these trials may be cleverly disguised as coming-of-age rituals, other celebrations some more combat-based. All, though, will be observed carefully by senior members of the chapter and chaplains who will be assessing key traits and behaviours, looking for candidates who fulfil their exacting requirements. Some of these aspirants from Feral worlds or even other worlds may not be truly aware of what Space Marines are, and this innocence may in some way protect them from making overthought errors that cost them later.
Honestly,
Still, some
true.
chapters actually take little interest in these early stages and will only actually become involved later once aspirants have been further thinned down. The whole process is a physical and psychological minefield. Some challenges could be unachievable, while others the simple act of survival is enough to merit approval to progress to the next stage.
I see. Yeah, I totally get it why like they would recruit from a populace that, maybe isn't from a military world. It's more from a feral world. Any great warriors or even the gang members, because it's tough. And you need people who have survival instincts living in the worst possible conditions. Those that have survived all of that will probably more than likely be able to survive any of these tests. This is an interesting perspective on Space Marines though. Because we always see the end product and always wish that we could become the super cool, badass Space Marines out there on the battlefield. And playing Space Marine 2, you can kind of do that with the power fantasy that it offers. But to get to that point is no joke, man.
All the tests put to Space Marine aspirants are designed to test every element of their being to the limit and expose any weaknesses that are present, as well as learn about how they handle and make judgments on situations they are presented with. While the recruitment age for these aspirants is undoubtedly young, it's worth remembering that the nightmare environment of the 41st millennium is undoubtedly very harsh, and so growing up and becoming an adult quickly is something which many learn to do, and so their age shouldn't necessarily dictate your judgment of them based on our current period in time. Standard Astartes trials for these young recruits can include knowledge of self. Astartes look at recruits' mental strength equally to the physical. The horrors they will face in their lives as a Space Marine, despite later conditioning, require the strongest character in a recruit to be successful and worthy.
When you're being sent down onto the most horrific battlefields in the universe, you need to be strong. If there is any kind of weakness that chaos will seep in and utilize, then no, you're not going to be cut out for being a Space Marine. And honestly, on the flip side, if you have a deep hatred towards a certain Xenos or Chaos, because maybe they ended up torching your home planet or something like that, if you're unable to control that sense of revenge and that anger, then you might become a liability on the battlefield. So maybe that's another side to it. Unless, of course, if you're through these trials able to prove that you can hone that anger into a tool rather than a detriment.
They may use a chapter librarian to impose psychic horrors on a recruit to see if they survive the nightmares they're forced to witness. He may be forced to take drugs and face the worst parts of his own psyche. The stress and trauma of this trial can often physically affect their bodies as well, so in many ways this becomes the ultimate test for recruits. Completion of this trial will undoubtedly fundamentally alter the young recruit forever. Some chapters, like the Imperial Fists, consider this kind of mental testing especially important, but do so by exposing their recruits to literal physical pain, and we use devices like the subtly titled Pain Glove. These
just like the one Rogel Dorn has in Emperor TTS, I see. Hey, if you're gonna stand steadfast and fortify your position, even if you experience an excruciating amount of pain, you do not back down. You do not retreat. That makes a lot of sense for the Imperial Fist.
Hook into the nervous system of the recruit and inflict horrific pain, but also maintain their consciousness well past what a normal individual could handle. The result will either be a mentally toughened but probably scarred individual, or a complete mental breakdown and death. An obvious and standard test for many recruits is exposure. Most worlds of the Imperium have unforgiving environments, and so sending out recruits into these wastes with little to survive with is an easy way to tell who is strong enough as a candidate. Space Marine apothecaries can rebuild damaged individuals, so the test is less of can you survive without consequences, and more simply, can you survive?
Yeah.
Many worlds are severely irradiated, frozen wastes, toxic wastelands, or ashen wastes, where planets have suffered total ecological collapse. Alternately, a planet could also be a literal jungle full of horrific creatures, small and large, ready to tear you to pieces, or just melt your face off.
Yeah. I always found it kind of sad that because of how expansive the 40k universe is, there are so many Xenos races out there that are left unexplored, and they kind of just mentioned in a footnote. It would be awesome if we could ever get like any sort of media or even a game to explore that concept further. But then again, I guess you could argue that that's not really what 40k is about.
As stated, the test is simple: survive for a set period of time. It will also likely involve some object of crossing a distance from A to B, so as to avoid recruits just digging a hole somewhere and sitting in it until time has elapsed. Some of the tests could well be impossible to complete and are simply assessing who can survive longest or travel furthest before dying or near death. The Ultramarines and Space Wolf chapters are known to favour exposure testing. A fairly self-explanatory trial, recruits are pitted against one another in one-on-one combat. When the last few remain, the assessing Astartes will usually halt the assessment. The type of duel could vary between armed or unarmed combat, consecutive combat, or recruits switching out on completing rounds. There is one constant though, and that is it's always a fight to the death. Again, apothecaries are able to heal most ordinary human wounds with ease, so these fights are often fairly no-holds-barred brutal affairs. Amputation and heavy trauma being the norm. Unsurprisingly, duels are the Blood Angels' trial of choice, but others such as Dark Angels, Imperial Fists and Space Wolves also put this trial to their recruits. War is life in the Imperium, and although some worlds know this more than others, planets used for recruitment usually have some form of regular combat going on. This trial is less a trial and more a means of assessing potential candidates. Astartes may have observed head-hunting particularly strong champions, or they may watch them from orbit, observing infighting between tribes on Imperial feral worlds. In this trial, recruits are tasked to head out into their homeworld and slay a beast for causing chaos or harm to their world. Many Imperial worlds host highly dangerous life forms or worse, infestations. The recruit must go out alone, or sometimes in small groups, and return with their captured hunt, often alive. With these group hunts though, the nasty twist is that there can only be one successful recruit, so they could turn on each other, break off alone to achieve or steal victory.
Oh god.
I personally question the validity of this test.
Yeah, right?
Fighting to the death to show strength over others seems plausible, but setting out in as a group, but then betraying other recruits seems to go kind of against the traits.
Right? Okay, we'll send you out, and this is your group of brothers. Make sure that you betray them, because only one of you is going to succeed. Now, welcome to our chapter. Make sure you never betray your brother like we taught you how to betray your brothers. I feel like there should be promotion of unity and moving as one as a unit, because, like, obviously you're a god on the battlefield, but usually you're not going to be the only one there, and working together with your battle brothers is kind of the only way all of you guys are going to survive. But you do you.
Astartes look for in recruits. Anyway, on returning home, they'll be required to slay their successful hunt in a ritual in front of their community before being led successfully away in the throes of glory. Lastly, the quite vague challenge trial. And this is exactly what it is, some form of probably unsurmountable challenge. This could be to attempt to fight a full-blown Space Marine in combat.
Jesus.
An impossible task, you might imagine, but usually remember this is the 41st millennium and bizarre occurrences are abound. While the thought of a child fighting a Space Marine seems insane, remember the task is usually to see how they approach it, not necessarily their success. In some extremely rare situations though, the aspirant may actually beat the Space Marine challenger. As completely impossible as this may seem, that individual usually will hold some unusual or rare power and will go on to become a legendary hero of the chapter. The aspirant will also usually be armed while the Space Marine unarmed and without his power armor. Still,
I mean, even then, it's an impossible task, a nigh impossible task, to be able to defeat one. I do kind of like this kind of testing though, because then you get to see like people who have maybe a more adaptive and creative way of approaching combat, because obviously you're not going to beat them in a full strength on strength fight. You got to get smart, unless of course, as Luton stated, if you do actually beat them in a strength on strength fight, then there's something very special about you, and you're probably a main character who's never going to wear their helmet.
Still, as with most of the former trials, the test here is really about if they can just survive at all, not so much best their opponent. Other arguably more horrific tests though could be non-combat based and test a recruit's strength, speed, mental skill or resistance to toxins. So they might for example be forced to drink nightmarish toxic chemicals, lift weights so heavy they break their bones apart, or evade some kind of horrific dangerous trap. Recruits deemed to have succeeded by whatever standards, however unlikely, will then be restored by chapter apothecaries. Ultramarines and again Imperial Fists favour these trials. Clearly, a great many recruits will not survive this stage of assessment, but even those who fail to be accepted but by some miracle survive will usually be heavily respected for having done so, not just by their families and friends, but by the assessing Astartes. Having done no wrong but maybe just not made the cut, these surviving but unsuccessful aspirants who were assessed on their home world may return to their former communities, a rare occurrence. Or they may continue on to serve the chapter as a serf, a menial but loyal servant who takes personal care of, say, a marine's armour and weaponry. Those returned to their homes are extremely few, but surprisingly are not perceived as failures. It would be made clear to all that having just survived, they have shown sheer strength and integrity as an Imperial citizen.
That makes sense. And I think it should be promoted more, even in real life. Like, you were able to go all the distance there, and you did your absolute best, but, you know, you didn't make the cut. Instead of being ridiculed or mocked for failing, you should be honored for having tried. And, I mean, in this kind of instance, it's not like, you know, here, have a participation award or anything like that, because the Astartes, these tests that they throw at you, they're not exactly just your regular sports competition, you know? You're expected to die, and if you don't, then you're clearly special.
They would then likely go on to become a strong leader for that world as Imperial Guard, Planetary Defense Force, or some other leadership.
Makes sense to me.
Successful aspirants will now become neophytes. They will move on to the next stage, where they'll begin the early stages of conversion to a full Space Marine with the initial implantation of the gene seed and chemical adaptation of their genetically enhanced organs.
Even more people don't survive this.
This could mean immediate departure with a Space Marine brother to the next phase, or it may be that they are allowed to celebrate in their home community before departure. A very huge moral boost for the Imperial community there, and also to help reinforce Imperial values and loyalty. To be able to say your community gained a successful Astartes recruit is no small thing, and statues, paintings, songs and stories will be told for many years, if not generations to come.
It's like a small village having somebody from the community become world famous, you know? That would be something that community would brag about for years to come. Like, there probably isn't much else there for them to be remembered by, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Neophytes will be expected to engage in training for combat as well as other mental training, as well as following chapter lore. If a neophyte should break chapter lore through ignorance or unthinkably by deliberately doing so, they will expect severe punishments. A neophyte breaking chapter lore will not simply be thrown out, they would likely be mind scrubbed, live out their lives as either, best case scenario, chapter serfs, being menial servants, or worse, forcible amputation and body conversion to life as cybernetic drones and slaves as servitors.
Yeah, don't do that.
Successful neophytes immediately will begin conditioning to be implanted with their gene seeds and relevant genetic enhancements. Space Marines must be male because the gene seed is only compatible with male hormones and genetics. So no, you won't see female Space Marines. The neophytes also
Well, about that.
need to be tested for compatibility. I'm always kind of surprised that this doesn't happen before the recruitment trials, but anyway, so they're tested for compatibility, otherwise as with organ...
Wait, I completely get that point, Luton. Like, why not test them for compatibility before you put them through hell? Because then what? Like, they go through all those testings, and then they're like, yeah, but you're not good enough physically. So then what do? You just go back home? That would suck, man. It's like you were just not born with the right genes.
Transplants. Rejection would be fatal for the neophyte. Even with this testing, it can still happen later down the line. They will then further have their mental strength checked before implantation of the gene seed begins, to ensure that they are in no way compromised by the forces of chaos. If all these criteria are approved, the neophyte recruit will now become a Space Marine Scout, or in some cases a full Space Marine Initiate. They will live isolated in the Space Marine Chapter's Fortress Monastery on the homeworld, save for any approved missions. The individual will be tutored on battle methods, tactics, psycho-conditioning, values, and the history of his chapter. The reason these early Marines are titled Initiates is because it is still unknown as to whether they will even survive to the final end process of becoming a full battle brother. I
mean, yeah. Despite the fact that you're basically a god on the battlefield, there are so many dangerous things in the universe that are going to kill you. Like some stray shot in the middle of the battlefield, you just completely pierce your helmet and then you're just gone. Done for. So, yeah.
19 organs grown from the chapter gene seed will be implanted to the neophyte initiate. Some are transplants and others are grown in the trainee Marine's body. The gene seed will also adapt and change and grow the individual's body to become the giant size of a Space Marine, towering over ordinary mortal humans. Much of the body chemistry will be fundamentally reworked during this time, and the gene seed contains genetically engineered viral machines which rebuild the body to the template created by the Emperor. Any implant has a potential to fail, and this rejection will automatically end and probably kill the initiate. As if the odds weren't stacked against them already, this further thins down the number who survive to the end of this arduous process.
I wonder what the growth pains would be like. Like, I'm a pretty tall guy, and I had some during puberty, and it really sucked. But I could only imagine growing to the size of a Space Marine throughout all that. Granted, it's probably not the most pain that they've experienced in their lives, but still, not something I want to experience ever again.
In brief, the 19 implanted or grown organs to become a full Space Marine are as follows. First, a secondary heart to increase blood supply and capacity. It can also pump steroids and extra adrenaline for battle situations. The osmodular or iron heart. This strengthens and grows the skeleton of a Space Marine so that his bones will contain a ceramic-based mineral which is added to an initiate's diet. After a few years, the Space Marine skeleton will be exponentially stronger than a normal human. The ribcage will have become fused to a solid bone plate, providing extra protection for internal organs. The biscopia is implanted within the chest cavity, and this increases skeletal muscular development, essentially muscle density. The hemastomen assists in carrying oxygen and nutrients more efficiently throughout the blood. It also assists in regulating the second and third implants. The Larraman's organ is also placed in the chest and manufactures synthetic Larraman cells. These serve like ordinary human blood platelets, but faster and more efficient. When a Space Marine is wounded, they form fully healed scar tissue in seconds, preventing hemorrhaging. This ability can make Space Marines appear invincible as they take wound after wound. Anything other than the most catastrophic of injuries is going to leave them still standing.
They'll still keep on going,
The catalepsion node is implanted in the back of the cerebrum. It allows Space Marines to avoid the need for sleep, entering them into a form of ongoing coma, allowing their brain the ability to systematically recharge by individual parts at a time. This
Intriguing. That does make a lot of sense, though, considering that operations may last days or weeks or months or years. There is no time for sleep when everybody is currently under attack at all times.
This enables them to stay on duty for hundreds of hours. The 7th implant is the preomnor. It functions as a decontamination chamber above the stomach and will analyze ingested materials, neutralizing any organic or inorganic toxins. It also enables Astartes to eat materials for sustenance that would kill ordinary humans.
Oh, well. That's the organ that prevents the space wolves from getting drunk, right? So they have to make their own special ale that would normally kill any other human.
The omophagia is implanted in the upper spinal cord. It absorbs information through ingested DNA and RNA related to memories. The purpose is to gain tactical or survival information by eating animals or life forms indigenous on a planet. In addition to a second heart, Space Marines also have multi-lungs as their 9th implant. 3 in fact. This is to give them extra oxygen absorption in thin air environments. In a toxic environment, their ordinary lungs are shut off to allow the 3rd lung to act as a filter for any necessary toxins. The 10th adaptation is the ocular lobe. It's a gene seed adaptation that enhances eyesight along the optic nerves. This gives increased accuracy of vision and increased low light sight ability. Lyman's ear is not simply better for more accurate hearing, it enables Marines to resist ordinary human dizziness and for them to be able to filter out white noise and sonic attacks. The Sasan membrane allows a Space Marine to enter a state of suspended animation. This can enable mortally wounded Marines to survive until help or an apothecary's arrival. This hibernation period has been known to be able to last for anything as long as half a century. Melanochrome alters the...
What the hell, man? So when you take a fatal wound, you just go into stasis? I guess having something like that is pretty necessary when you need to go and collect the gene seed from them. Makes an apothecary's job more viable.
The pigments in the skin cells, allowing Astartes to shield himself from dangerous radiation and heat. Different levels of this in effect can cause physical differences between chapters, such as the very pale skin of the Blood Angels or the darker skin of the Salamanders. The oolitic kidney...
Well, I mean, the salamanders are literally burned by fire, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Filters blood to further remove toxins that have been ingested in combination with the 7th organ. It is best not to think of this though like an ordinary kidney, as this organ functions to assist in removing toxins before they have passed through any normal process of absorption. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very useful. It also helps to regulate the advanced circulatory system and other organs. The neuroglottis in the mouth allows a Marine to biochemically analyze things by taste or smell, or determine if something is poisonous or safe. Despite their advanced organs, this could still be very useful for a variety of purposes, and it can also enable them to track targets, much like a canine. The muconoid is implanted in the nervous system and, if activated through an external treatment, will cause the Astartes skin to secrete a waxy substance. This will cocoon them to protect them in situations of extended suspended animation, even the vacuum of space or other temperature extremes.
So that's why that some Space Marines can survive. Well, I mean, most Space Marines could probably survive a fight in space for a few minutes. Obviously, it's a Primarch that might be a bit different, or if you're just a named Space Marine.
The Betcher's gland consists of 2 glands implanted in the mouth. These allow the Astartes to use their saliva as a corrosive acid when consciously activated. This could enable them to corrode bars if they were held captive, or remove doors from their hinges. It also can assist them in eating difficult to break down substances. Some Marine chapters have found that this organ no longer functions or has become less effective over time. The progenoid glands, or the gene...
Okay, well, I can't really imagine a situation where I've ever seen a Space Marine use that. Like, you just spit acid?
Gene seeds are the critical organs of a space marine. They're implanted into the neck and chest cavity and serve as reproductive glands to allow their DNA to be collected upon death and safeguard the continuity of the chapter. Apothecaries of a Space Marine chapter will cultivate germ cells from the progenoid glands to create the 19 organs of a Space Marine, or some of them because some are grown within the Space Marine themselves. The final organ is the black carapace, otherwise called the interface. This material is implanted under the skin of the chest with the now shell-like ribcage. Fibred bundles then grow inward and interlink with the Space Marine's nervous system. Points for these bundles are pre-cut by apothecaries and form neural connection points. The function of these are to allow a Space Marine to interface with the heavy power armor, or as some would have you believe, the armor's machine spirit.
The armor also has a machine spirit? I didn't know this, but I did know that the whole reason why they can move super fast despite wearing such bulky armor is because, well, they basically just interface with each other. It's basically a part of their body, and that's why the Space Marines have these, like, holes in their back and stuff like that.
These connections enables faster reaction and maneuverability. Without this, Space Marines would lumber around very much encumbered by the heavy armor they wear. It's worth remembering that this whole process probably sounds heavily traumatic, but consider that it ideally happens when the young neophyte initiates between the ages of about 10 to 12 years old and should be then completed by age 18. Many are going to suffer critical or multiple organ failure during the process. The penalty, or arguably mercy for this, is usually euthanasia, although conversion to a servitor for the chapter is sometimes an option depending on chapters and their needs. Again, for those families who never see their sons again, in some cases it's probably for the best. All they need to know is he's serving the Imperium.
Oh, God.
And more recently, since the involvement of Belisarius' call of the Mechanicum, Primaris Marines are a new breed of superhuman Astartes.
Ah, yeah. We did see this, well, we didn't see the whole process, but our boy Titus ended up becoming one, so...
Under instruction from Roboute Guilliman, Primaris Astartes are only created from the gene seeds of loyalist Primarchs. They contain 3 additional organs, and their gene seed is considerably more genetically stable. Guilliman had instructed Call to develop these new organs with the goal of creating the Primaris. And their additional organs are the sinew coils. This enables the sinew of a Primaris Astartes to be durametallic, contracting with immense force, gifting them extreme strength and his body further resilience. This increased strength will literally enable them to crush the skulls of their enemies with bare hands. The magnifact, and this small lobe is inserted to the brain cortex. It secretes a hormone to increase the body's growth functions, with the goal of also intensifying further functions of the other implanted organs. Apparently, this organ is in fact half of the immortis gland, the god-maker gland of the Primarchs. For undisclosed reasons, Call was only able to discover the right half of this gland, not the full gland itself. The left half had been fully eradicated from Imperial records by either the Emperor himself or others unknown. And third,
I guess it didn't really work out. Or maybe it has something to do with the 2 Primarchs that we don't talk about ever again.
The Belisarian Furnace. This organ lies dormant and connects to both a Marine's hearts. In times of immense physical stresses, it expels chemicals simulating combat stimulants, increasing the regrowth of tissue, bone and muscle. This is a short-term use organ and requires time to recharge after using.
Huh. You know what? That sounds almost like Titus's ability that you get in Space Marine 2. He just starts gaining a ton of health in the middle of battle, all of a sudden. And it's on a short cooldown.
Now, if this incredibly harrowing physical conversion is successful, the neophyte or initiate will have completed the arguably most challenging part of his transformation. However, during these changes, they will still be undergoing some of the most challenging training and assessment regimes humanity had ever known. Psychological and physical conditioning, subconscious therapy, and endless live battle training sessions. Their senses and mental abilities far exceed ordinary humans by the end of this process. Their mental toughness is beyond measure, and an Astartes will essentially ignore pain and environmental conditions. and Astartes will assault enemies who, to simply look upon, would make an ordinary human suffer a complete mental break. Many, through endless conditioning, will develop photographic memories. Much of this round-the-clock therapy will also neutralize any...
Is that really something you could develop? Although I suppose with all this body modification that is possible. I feel like for us it's just something that some people are born with.
...latent character flaws and create stable, highly single-minded warriors. This endless mental and physical indoctrination will also teach and reinforce high respect for authority and to expertly carry out orders. With that said, it's important to remember that Space Marines are not mindless drones or clones. They are individuals,
far from it.
And while always following the rule of command, if a situation warrants it, they are entirely capable of disobeying orders if they believe it to be ultimately necessary. The consequences for this, though, could be, and usually are, potentially highly severe. At the end of this process, the few successful young children who were pitted against one another and survived the ordeals to reach this point will be welcomed as successful young initiates, becoming full Space Marine battle brothers. Imperial Astartes, the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Astartes' aging, though, does seem somewhat random, with some living even as long as 10,000 years. But given the fractured and strange nature of time in the 41st millennium, it can be really hard to put accurate expectancies on this, and many Marines who are not killed may reach at least half a century in age. It's no exaggeration to state that on successfully becoming an Astartes, these men would be far from what you would recognise as human. Their extended lives and nearly unbreakable bodies are truly no prize. Their lives from this point on are spent in the sole act of defending humanity and the Imperium of Man. Accepting that their lives will be lost in battle at some point in the future, probably in horrific circumstances, they'll never see anyone they had ever known in their lives again. Families, friends will die far before they even begin to think of such things.
Yes.
Space Marines are the protectors. Humanity in the 41st millennium stands on a precipice. We've known many horrors, disasters, and catastrophes, the ending of many worlds, but the next millennia will be the most critical. Threats surround humanity, some still difficult to gauge just how severe and if we can resist them. Our hope is in the Astartes, and the Imperium of Man, and the Emperor. With the Primarch Rubik Guilliman returned, there is a glimmer of hope in the darkness.
Yeah. That's all you can do. Of course, Gilliman would say the classic line, War never changes. What a brutal process, though. But I guess because of everything that you've been taught your entire life, this is obviously the highest honor that you can achieve, and probably a better end for you than what you would have had if you had just stayed on your own home planet. So, yeah. As long as you're able to survive through the trials and get through all of that, then you at least get to be a badass and go out swinging for the Imperium. Well, to be fair, I guess some Space Marines have it even worse when they get captured by Chaos, but, you know, that's kind of par for the course for basically anybody in the universe.